Hi, hello, welcome to Spell Day. We're covering a spell every single day of the year. +3 from the 5e PHB. The +3 are homebrew spells. We're currently at +1 at the moment. You can head back in the playlist to find it. Today's spell is Freedom of Movement. Fourth level Abjuration, casting time of 1 action, range of touch, components verbal somatic material, a leather strap bound around the arm or similar appendage. Duration 1 hour. Touch a willing creature for the duration. The target's movement is unaffected by difficult terrain, and spells and other magical effects can neither reduce the target's speed nor cause the target to be paralyzed or restrained. Target can also spend 5 feet of movement to automatically escape from non-magical restraints, such as manacles or a creature that has it grappled. Finally, being underwater imposes no penalties to the target's movement or attacks. Does that include range? Has to be a willing creature for 1. It's a touch spell, which is nice. 4th level? Lasts for an hour, not concentration, which is pretty nice. And if I were to guess, if this was a lower level, it would be concentration. 4th level hurts it a bit. I mean, 3rd level's Fireball. 4th level's also Dimension Door. Is Freedom of Movement really worth more than either of those? 1 action, touch, middle of combat, you can do this. Actually, middle of combat, you can do this. I guess the idea is the fact since it's an action, yes, you can do this in prep or at the start of combat. It's not concentration for an hour, but you could also touch this on someone who is restrained. I mean, think about it. Like, if let's say you head into a prison area or one of your allies is entirely tied together or chained to a manacled to a dungeon wall, rush in, cast this. No one needs to make a checks for thieves' tools to break that open or strength checks to try and rip it off the walls. Just that 5-foot movement and they're out. Can't be restrained. Helps with nets, and depending on what you're fighting, some creatures are really, really good into restraining targets or holding them back or use things like nets. Ignoring difficult terrain for no concentration for an hour is really nice, which again is probably why this is 4th level. Also, speed can't be reduced. They can't be paralyzed or restrained through magical means. That's pretty good. Caltrops, though, however, would still affect them, funnily enough, because it's not magical, you're just stepping on a lot of spikes. Though the final feature of this, which is probably where you're going to get the most use out of it, or maybe not the most use, but in the situation you would need it, is the most useful. Being underwater provides no penalty to movement or attacks. It's the specific word of no penalty. It doesn't say attack rolls, it just says attacks. Which, if we are just taking that at that wording, and freedom of movement affects the magic around it, does that also mean things like bolts, arrows, slings are not halved their distance like they are underwater? You can just go full distance as well, no disadvantage on the attack. You just swing, shoot, fire, and you're fine. And swim and move around like you would. That's pretty good. That's really good. Again, that's one specific underwater scenario, which is probably why it's the last part of this spell. It's nice that's not a separate spell, though, right? One thing I am sad about is it doesn't have an upcast option. I mean, it's 4th level, so you could just spend other spell slots to hit or affect creatures, but it'd be nice if that could just be an upcast feature. Instead of spending multiple spell slots, you could just spend 1 high-level spell slot to affect multiple creatures with freedom of movement, which now, thinking of that scenario as a DM, I realize why that's not an option, because that's terrifying if they are going into a counter that has some of these features and traits. Whether it's underwater, has difficult terrain, restrained or paralyzed, etc. It's a spell I feel like would be good, and is too good, and which is why it suffers from the traits it has, which isn't the usual, which is concentration. Because it would never be worth it if it took concentration. Never. Maybe not never. But it wouldn't really be worth it. But then because it's not concentration, they didn't have an upcast option, and they bumped it up probably from the levels it was at originally. It would be my assumption when in the making of this spell. I don't know. Which, because of that, rating-wise, oh man, 5 out of 10? In the situation you need it or want it, it is amazing. It is definitely worth a cast. People regularly prepping it and casting it commonly, I don't see. It's not concentration, so you're not sacrificing that feature of other spells, but the spell slot itself you are, and the prep slot, depending on what class you're playing. 5 out of 10. It's a real coin flip in my head. Mention below what you think it should be, or scenarios that I didn't think up with this.